The evening slowly spread its darkness across the city streets. The trees in the park swayed gently with the soft breath of the wind, while the last red rays of the sun painted the sky with a farewell glow. I was sitting alone in a quiet corner of the park. My exams were near. Books were lying open in front of me, and I was trying to focus on studying, but my mind kept drifting away in exhaustion. There was only a little time left before the Maghrib prayer. I gathered my books and decided to return to my room. I had barely taken a few steps when suddenly I noticed a young man standing beneath the shadow of an old tree in the park. He was alone. His head was lowered, his shoulders trembling, and tears were flowing from his eyes as if years of pain had remained imprisoned inside his heart. His face looked pale and restless, like someone who had not slept for many nights. I could not bring myself to walk past him indifferently. I approached him carefully and said softly, "If you don't mind, may I ask you something?" He slowly lifted his head. His eyes were red from crying. In a weak voice, he replied, "Yes, ask." I asked quietly, "Why are you crying?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he slowly reached into his pocket, took out a folded white letter, and extended it toward me. His hands were shaking. I unfolded the paper. The very first lines made my heart heavy. It read, "You may be upset with me, because my family will never allow your hands to reach me. But believe me, you are the last lamp of my life. You are the only hope left in my darkness." I continued reading. Every sentence felt like the scream of a wounded girl's heart. "I love you so deeply, and if love is a crime, then I am ready to walk into hell for you. But I am helpless, so helpless, that if I told you the story of my life, you would wonder why I am still alive." My throat went dry. The letter became even more painful. "You boys at least have choices. If you don't like something, you can leave your home, leave the city, run away. But us girls, we only cry. We share our pain with our pillows and hand our screams over to the darkness of the night." Slowly, I became lost inside the world of that letter. Every line sounded like years of silent suffering. We live lives that, if anyone truly knew about them, they would say, "This is not life, this is a prison." The young man stood in front of me, but he looked like someone whose soul had already shattered. I looked back at the letter. "You may blame me, but if you truly loved me, then know this. I have become so helpless that even your own helplessness would feel small beside mine." There were stains of tears all over the pages. Some words were so blurred they were almost unreadable. I lifted my head. The young man was still crying. Softly, I asked him, "Who wrote this letter?" He remained silent for a moment. Then he looked up toward the sky and in a broken voice said, "The girl who now lives in another man's house." At that moment, I realized this was not just a letter. It was the final story of two broken hearts. The darkness of the evening grew deeper. One by one, the park lights turned on, and the shadows of the trees stretched farther across the ground. I sat beside the young man on the old bench. He still held the letter tightly in his hands, staring at it as though it were the last remaining piece of his entire life. For a few moments, silence surrounded us. Only the sound of the wind and his trembling breaths could be heard. I spoke gently. "If you want, you can tell me everything." He wiped his eyes, took a deep breath, and finally began. "I met her 3 years ago." His voice was weak and broken. "The first time I saw her was in a bookstore. She wore a white scarf, and in her hands was a book of poetry. I don't know why, but that very day I felt my heart change. He smiled faintly, but it was a smile filled with pain. She barely spoke, but every word she said felt like peace. I remained silent. He kept talking, and I felt as if I were watching a heartbreaking scene from a movie. He continued. Slowly we began talking. Then it became a habit, then love. He looked toward the sky. I swear, I had never seen a love so pure. His eyes filled with tears again. She used to tell me, if one day I become far away from you, believe me, my heart will still stay with you. Softly I asked, then what happened? He lowered his head. For a few seconds, he said nothing. Then he whispered, her family found out. He spoke the sentence as though a knife had been dragged across his heart. They took away her phone, stopped her from going to university. They even prevented her from standing near the window and looking at the sky. My heart grew heavy. He continued. Sometimes she would secretly send me messages from her little sister's phone, only writing, "Don't forget me." His voice trembled more and more. One night she called me. She was crying badly. I asked quietly, "What did she say?" He closed his eyes, as if that night had returned before him once again. She said to me, "If tomorrow my voice disappears from your life, know that I was forced." A cold feeling ran through my body. He continued. The next day she got engaged. The atmosphere of the park suddenly felt even more silent. I wanted to go to her, to end everything, but she told me, "I swear to you, don't ruin your life because of me." He looked back at the letter. This was her final letter, sent 3 days after her wedding. Softly I asked, "Did you ever see her again?" He gave a faint smile, a smile more painful than tears. "Yes, only once." I looked at him in surprise. He whispered, "In the city market." His eyes filled again. She was carrying a small child in her arms, but I swear, her eyes were still crying my name. I fell silent. Then he spoke softly. That day I understood something. Some people may belong to someone else in life, but their hearts forever remain where they truly loved. A cold breeze passed through the park. Suddenly, the young man reached into his pocket again and pulled out another old folded paper. He handed it to me and whispered, "This is her last message. I have never shown it to anyone before." I slowly took the paper. The park had become even quieter now. In the distance, the faint sounds of cars echoed through the city. Yet around us there was such deep silence that it felt as though time itself had stopped. The paper was worn out from being folded countless times. Its edges were old, and marks of tears were visible all over it. It looked as if it had been read hundreds of times. I carefully unfolded it. The very first line said, "If you are reading this letter, then know that I no longer belong to you. But my heart still whispers your name." My chest tightened. I continued reading. "Those nights when you used to talk to me, I would forget all the pain of the world. You never knew this, but your voice was life itself for me." The young man's eyes remained fixed on my face, as though he was reliving the last memories of his life through every word I read. The letter continued. "I tried so hard. I truly tried to become yours. But here, no one listens to a girl's wishes. No one sees her tears." Some of the words below were blurred by tears. I kept reading. "I got married. People were happy. The house was filled with music and celebration. But believe me, that night, I felt as if they were burying my life. The young man lowered his head. Tears fell silently across his hands. When they told me, "You no longer belong to him," I said only one thing inside my heart. A person may be separated from someone physically, but never from love. I took a deep breath. Every sentence pierced straight into the soul. The letter said, "You may think I forgot you. No. Every night I repeat your name silently inside my heart. And when everyone falls asleep, I stare at the ceiling and cry in secret." I reached the final part of the letter. There, she had written, "If one day you see my son, and his name is your name, don't be surprised, because I wanted at least your name to remain with me forever." The young man's breathing became uneven. In a broken voice, he whispered, "Her son carries my name." I looked at him in shock. He nodded slowly. "She named her son after me." His voice shattered. "When I saw her in the market, she was holding him in her arms. And she only said one sentence. 'He carries your name.'" He could not continue speaking. He lowered his head and disappeared into silence. I slowly folded the letter. I did not know what to say. Some pains are too deep to heal. They can only be heard. After a few moments, he suddenly reached into his pocket once more. This time, he pulled out a small black phone. In a trembling voice, he said, "Her last voice recording is inside this phone. I still haven't deleted it." He stared at the screen. His hands trembled badly. Then he whispered, "The night she recorded this message." The next morning, her entire life changed. Without thinking, I asked, "What did she say in the recording?" He moved his finger toward the play button, then slowly closed his eyes. The cold air of the park suddenly felt heavier. The leaves of the trees rustled softly in the wind, while the darkness of the night wrapped everything in silence. The young man still held the phone tightly. His fingers trembled, as though reaching toward the final hope of his heart. I said nothing. I only sat there quietly beside him. He took a deep breath and pressed play. For a few seconds, there was only silence. Then, a trembling girl's voice softly echoed from the phone. "Assalamu alaikum." Just those two words carried enough pain to shake a heart. Then silence again, as though even she lacked the strength to speak. Finally, in a broken voice, she said, "I don't know when you will hear this recording, but if you do, then know that I am no longer the same girl." The young man's eyes instantly filled with tears. The recording continued. "Today my marriage became official. Everyone was happy, but inside, I was dying. My throat tightened painfully. When the Qazi asked for my answer, my heart wanted to scream and say, I belong to someone else. My heart was left somewhere else." Behind her voice, the sound of quiet crying could be heard. But I stayed silent, like always, because in our world, a girl's silence is considered the greatest form of respect. The young man lowered his head. Tears dripped onto his hands. Her voice became softer. "Please don't hate me. Forgive me. I tried so hard, but I could not become yours." A few seconds of silence followed. Then she whispered, "There's something I want to tell you. Maybe you'll laugh." Her voice trembled slightly. "Today, when they brought me my wedding clothes, the first thing I hid was your photograph. I was afraid someone might see it." The young man covered his eyes with both hands. The recording continued. "People say time makes us forget everything. But I know, some people are never forgotten, because they do not live inside our hearts. They live inside our souls. The silence of the park became unbearably heavy. Then her voice slowly broke again. If one day you never hear my voice again, don't call me disloyal. Don't think badly of me. I was only helpless. I felt my own eyes become wet. The final words of the recording began. And yes, if one day you have a son, tell him that love is not weakness. Love is the greatest sacrifice. Then, only the sound of her crying remained. And suddenly, the recording ended. The park drowned in silence once again. The young man sat motionless for several moments, as though his soul had shattered with the ending of that voice. Finally, with great difficulty, he whispered, "That was the last time I ever heard her voice." Softly, I asked him, "Did you ever speak to her again after that?" He remained silent for a moment. Then he lifted his eyes toward the dark sky, and in a broken voice replied, "Yes, but after some time, something happened that changed my entire life forever." I looked at him quietly. He slowly turned off the phone and whispered, 6 months after her marriage, one night, I received a call from an unknown number. My heart skipped a beat. Without realizing it, I asked, "Who was calling?" He lowered his head slightly. "Her." Then he paused. But this time, her voice was different. The night around us had grown colder. The weak lights of the park reflected softly through the leaves, while the freezing air seemed to sink deep into the soul. I remained seated beside him. At this point, his story no longer felt like an ordinary love story. It felt like the story of two hearts from whom life had stolen everything, except love. He took a deep breath and continued. 6 months had passed since her wedding. He stared at the phone screen in silence. I tried to forget her, but how can someone forget the person tied to every prayer, every memory, and every dream inside them? I said nothing. He continued softly. One night, very late, my phone suddenly rang. He closed his eyes. The number was unfamiliar. At first, I thought it was a wrong call, but when I answered, his voice shook. My heart stopped. I whispered, "It was her." He nodded slowly. "Yes," but her voice sounded different. His tone became heavier. Very softly she said, "Please don't hang up the phone." My chest tightened. He continued. Her voice was trembling, as though she was in terrible pain. I asked quietly, "What did she say then?" For a few seconds, he stayed silent. Then in a shattered voice, he whispered. She said, "I am not okay." A cold wind passed between us. He lowered his eyes. I panicked and asked her what happened. Then he whispered. She was crying, and all she said was, "Sometimes a person grows tired of their fate." My heart felt unbearably heavy. He continued. I could feel she was hiding something from me. I kept insisting, and slowly, she began telling me about her life. His voice became quieter. She said not a single day of those 6 months had passed peacefully. I stared at him. He continued. She told me, "Everyone in that house says a woman must endure everything. Pain, humiliation, tears, everything." He clenched his hands tightly. She said, "Every day I smile in front of people, but when I am alone, I cry as though my soul is slowly dying." The silence of the park became even heavier. He continued. I told her, "If your life is this painful, then leave. I will never leave you alone." A bitter smile appeared on his face. But she laughed. He shook his head slowly. It was the kind of laugh more painful than tears. Then he whispered, We girls cannot leave so easily. Our footsteps are chained by traditions. My breathing grew heavy. He looked at me again. Then suddenly, she said something I can never forget. I asked softly, "What did she say?" His eyes filled with tears again. Then, with great difficulty, he answered, "If one day you hear news of my death, believe me, I will not have died because I was tired of life. I will have died from helplessness." My heart trembled violently. The young man fell silent. For several moments, only the sound of his breathing could be heard. Then quietly he continued, "I talked to her the entire night. I tried to give her hope. I told her everything would become better." He closed his eyes. But I did not know. Those would be our last long conversation together. Without thinking, I asked, "Then what happened?" He slowly lifted his head, and in a voice so broken it felt unbearable to hear, he said, "3 days later, I saw a crowd gathered outside her house." My heart suddenly froze. He whispered, and then I heard the news. The news that still shakes my soul to this day. The morning had not fully arrived yet. A pale silence covered the streets of the city, while the cold dawn wind pushed dry leaves across the roads. The young man still sat before me, but now his voice sounded like someone who had aged years in a single night. He spoke softly. 3 days later, I had left home for work. He took a deep breath. When I reached her street, there was a strange crowd gathered there. My heart pounded heavily. He continued. Women were crying. People stood everywhere, and several cars were parked outside the house. I whispered, "Then." He remained silent for a few seconds, as though reliving those moments inside his mind. Then he spoke. I stopped a man and asked him, "What happened here?" His voice trembled, and he replied, "The bride of this house has passed away." My breath stopped. The air of the park suddenly felt painfully heavy. The young man lowered his head. Tears streamed down his face. I swear, at that moment, it felt as if the entire world collapsed on top of me. He wiped his tears with trembling hands. My legs stopped moving. My voice disappeared, and all I could hear were her final words echoing in my ears. "If one day you hear news of my death." I remained completely silent. His story had now reached the deepest point of pain. He continued. People said she suddenly became ill. Some said it was a heart attack. Then he slowly lifted his eyes toward me. But I knew the truth. I whispered softly, "What truth?" His eyes looked empty. I knew she died from sorrow, from silence, from helplessness. Only the sound of the wind remained between us for several moments. Then quietly he said, "I wanted to see her one last time. Just once." His voice broke again, but I didn't even have the courage to walk toward the door of that house. I asked softly, "Did you finally see her?" He nodded faintly. "Yes." When they brought out her funeral, my world fell apart. His eyes filled with tears once more. She lay there wrapped in white cloth. The same girl who once told me, "You are the hope of my life." My heart became unbearably heavy. He continued. People were crying, but no one knew how much silent pain she had endured while she was alive. He tightened his hands together. I could only watch her from far away. I did not even have the right to say her name one final time. Silence spread between us again. After several moments, he slowly reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small old amulet and placed it gently into my hand. Then he whispered, "She gave this to me." I looked at it carefully. Inside was a tiny folded piece of paper. I slowly opened it. Only one sentence was written inside. If I am gone, then live for both of us, because half of my life will always remain with you. My eyes filled with tears. The young man looked toward the sky and whispered, "She left this world, but she took everything inside me with her." I felt there was still an untold secret hidden behind the pain in his eyes. Softly, I asked him, "Did you never get married after that?" Suddenly, he fell silent. For a few moments, he said nothing. Then a faint smile appeared on his face, a smile carrying thousands of wounds inside it. And quietly, he replied, "After her death, I saw her son again, and that child became the greatest test of my life." The night was slowly reaching its final hours. The lights of the park still glowed softly, but the sky was gradually preparing itself for dawn. I sat there listening to him as though I were hearing the final pages of a broken heart's life story. He remained silent for a few moments. Then he took a deep breath and said, "After she died, I was never the same person again." His voice carried exhaustion. Everything felt empty. People laughed, life moved on. But inside me, everything had already died. He looked toward the distant lights of the park. I tried many times to keep myself busy. I worked, I studied. But every night, the same voice recordings, the same letters, and the same memories returned to me. I stayed quiet. He continued. About a year passed. Then he lowered his head slightly. One day, I went to the city market, and there I saw a little boy. My heart beat faster. A faint smile appeared on his face again, but it was still filled with pain. The child was standing outside a toy shop, looking at a small toy car with his tiny hands. He paused. I don't know why, but the moment I looked into his eyes, my heart stopped. Softly I asked, "Why?" He laughed weakly through tears. Because his eyes were hers. Exactly hers. A gentle breeze passed through the trees. He continued. I looked at him, and the child kept staring back at me. Then his voice became softer. Suddenly, he walked toward me and held my hand. I looked at him in surprise, and quietly he said, "Do you know the first thing he asked me?" I slowly shook my head. Through tears, he smiled again. He said, "Are you the one?" My heart trembled. He continued. I was shocked. I asked him, "Which one?" His voice lowered even more. The child replied, "Mom used to look at your photograph every night and cry." My own eyes became wet. The young man looked up toward the sky. That little boy had no idea how deeply those words were tearing my heart apart. Then he continued. I asked him, "What is your name?" For the first time, a real smile touched his face, and he told me the same name, the name she had given him after me. The silence around us became unbearably heavy once again. He continued speaking slowly. Then the child reached into his tiny pocket and pulled out an old photograph. I whispered, "Whose picture was it?" He tried wiping away his tears. "Mine." My chest tightened painfully. He continued. The child said to me, "Mom told me, if I ever found you, I should tell you that you were never a bad person." I felt my throat close. Slowly, the young man continued. Then he told me, "Mom used to say, if one day I am gone, he will come back." His voice broke completely. At that moment, I realized she had waited for me until her very last breath. Silence surrounded us again. Then quietly he said, "But the story still wasn't over." I looked at him in confusion. Slowly, He reached into his pocket once again and pulled out another folded letter. He held it toward me and whispered, "This letter, she left it for her son one day before her death, so that one day he could give it to me." My heart began pounding heavily. I slowly took the letter. At the top, the first line read, "If you are reading this letter, then perhaps I am no longer alive in this world." The first light of dawn slowly spread across the edges of the sky. The silence of the park was now mixed with the faint songs of birds. Yet between us, the same heavy sadness still remained. With trembling hands, I unfolded the final letter. The paper had become old. Tear stains covered many parts of it, and some words looked as though they had been written while crying. Slowly, I began reading. "If you are reading this letter, then perhaps I am no longer alive in this world." My chest grew heavy. Maybe you are still upset with me. Maybe you believe I abandoned you. But believe me, until my final breath, I loved only you. The young man's eyes remained fixed on the paper, as though every sentence was bringing his buried memories back to life again. I continued reading. "After my death, I know you will break apart completely. That is why I am leaving this letter behind, so you can live again." My throat felt dry. "Perhaps you will never understand, but every single night, I prayed for you, even in the house where my body lived. But my heart never did." A soft breeze moved through the trees. The letter continued. "I could not remain yours, but I am leaving one trust behind for you." I paused. Then my eyes moved to the next words. "My son." The young man lowered his head. Tears dropped silently onto his hands. "When he grows up, tell him his mother was never weak. She was only helpless." I took a deep breath. "And tell him, if one day he truly loves someone, he should never let go of their hand. Because some separations slowly kill a person." I reached the final lines of the letter. "There," she had written, "and you, please keep living. For me too, because even there, I will continue praying for your happiness." Then came the final sentence, the sentence that shook my heart. "In another life, if God wills, I will belong only to you." Slowly, I lowered the letter. My eyes had become wet with tears. The young man sat there silently, as though his entire life had passed beneath the shadow of those few pages. After several moments, I softly asked him, "What happened to her son after that?" A faint smile appeared on his face, a smile filled with both sorrow and love. Then he replied, "That child became the reason I continued living." I looked at him quietly. He continued, "I never allowed him to grow up alone. Every month, I secretly helped him. His school expenses, clothes, everything." His voice softened. "Sometimes I would watch him from far away, and in my heart I would say, 'He is the last piece of her soul left in this world.'" Then he looked toward the sky. "Now that child has grown up, and he still does not know how much pain was hidden behind his mother's love." The morning sun slowly began rising. The young man quietly stood up. He gathered the letters into his hands. Then before leaving, he looked at me one final time. And softly, he said the one sentence I have never forgotten. "Some loves are never meant to reach us, but those unfinished loves become the soul of a person for the rest of their life." Then he slowly walked away, and I remained alone on that old park bench, feeling as though I had just witnessed the entire lifetime pain of two broken hearts with my own eyes. The end.